I thought I was calling to ask what time he wanted dinner served. Instead, my world shattered with 5 simple words. We eloped to Vegas last weekend. My name is Dorothy, I'm 52 years old, and this is the story of how one phone call changed everything I thought I knew about being a mother. If you've ever felt like you lost control of your child's life, or if you've ever been excluded from a moment that should have included you, then this story will resonate with your heart in ways you never expected. It was a Tuesday morning in November, one of those crisp autumn days where the leaves crunched under your feet and the air smelled like promises of the holidays ahead. I had my planner open on my kitchen counter, the same leather-bound planner I'd used for the past 15 years to organize every detail of our family life. My favorite pen, the blue one Marcus had given me for Mother's Day when he was 12, was poised over a fresh page titled, Thanksgiving Planning. You know how it is when you're a single mother. Every holiday becomes a production, every celebration an opportunity to prove that your broken family is actually perfectly whole. I've been hosting Thanksgiving for 23 years, ever since Marcus was 5 years old and told me through a mouthful of my homemade stuffing that it was better than his grandmother's. That became our tradition, our sacred time, the one day of the year when everything had to be absolutely perfect. I had already started my mental checklist: turkey from the premium grocery store downtown, special ordered 2 weeks in advance. Fresh cranberries, not canned, because presentation matters. The good china, the crystal glasses that only came out twice a year, the linen napkins that required special care but made the table look like something out of a magazine. Every year, I transformed my dining room into what I imagined the perfect American family would gather around. I dialed Marcus's number with a smile on my face, already imagining how this year would be different. Better. He was 27 now, had a steady job at the marketing firm, and had been dating Sarah for almost 2 years. This would be the first Thanksgiving where I could really show off what our family looked like when it was complete, when it looked like what I'd always dreamed it could be. The phone rang once, twice, and then his familiar voice answered, but something was immediately different. There was an edge to his, "Hello, Mom," that I couldn't quite place, a tension that made my stomach clench with the kind of maternal instinct that knows something is wrong before your brain catches up. "Hey baby," I said, trying to keep my voice light and cheerful. I was just calling to confirm Thanksgiving. Should I set the table for 4 this year with Sarah joining us? And does she have any dietary restrictions I should know about? I want to make sure everything is perfect for her. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I could hear him breathing on the other end, could almost feel his hesitation traveling through the phone lines and settling in my chest like a cold weight. In that silence, I heard the television in the background, some morning talk show chattering about holiday recipes, and I found myself wondering why he was home watching TV on a Tuesday morning instead of at work. When he finally spoke, his words hit me like a physical blow, like someone had reached through the phone and knocked all the air from my lungs. "Mom, we need to talk. Sarah and we eloped to Vegas last weekend." The pen fell from my hand, clattering against the marble countertop and leaving a small blue mark on my carefully organized planner. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might be having some kind of medical episode, some kind of breakdown that would explain why I was hearing impossible words coming from my son's mouth. "What did you just say?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "We got married, Mom." It was spur of the moment. We drove to Vegas Friday night, found a chapel Saturday morning, and by Saturday afternoon we were husband and wife. It was just us, an Elvis impersonator, and a couple of witnesses we met at the casino. It was perfect. Perfect. That word hit me like a slap across the face. How could my son's wedding be perfect without me there? How could the most important day of his life happen without his mother standing beside him, crying happy tears and telling him how proud she was? How could perfect not include the woman who had raised him alone, sacrificed everything for him, planned every milestone of his life with meticulous care? "Marcus, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you invite me? I'm your mother. I've been dreaming about your wedding day since you were born. I had ideas, plans, I could have helped you make it beautiful. Mom, please don't make this about you." His voice was gentle but firm, the tone he used when he was trying to manage my emotions, and that realization stung worse than his words. We wanted something simple, something that was just ours. You know how you get with big events. How I get? What did that even mean? I threw beautiful parties. I organized everything down to the last detail. I made sure everyone felt included and loved and celebrated. How was that a bad thing? How was caring about making things special somehow wrong? I don't know what you mean, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, a small voice in my head wondered if maybe I did know exactly what he meant. Maybe I had heard that tone in his voice before, when I was rearranging his apartment or suggesting improvements to his dinner parties or asking why he hadn't called me to help plan his last birthday celebration. Look, Mom, we're happy. That's what matters, right? We'll still come to Thanksgiving as planned, and you can meet Sarah properly as my wife. Maybe we can have a little reception later, something small with family and close friends. Wife. My son had a wife, and I hadn't been there to see him promise to love, honor, and cherish her. I hadn't been there to cry happy tears or hug him tight or tell him how proud I was of the man he'd become. I hadn't been there to welcome Sarah into our family, to tell her how grateful I was that she loved my boy, to share in the joy of two people choosing to build a life together. Marcus, this hurts. This really, really hurts. I feel like I've lost you. You haven't lost me, Mom. I'm still your son. I'm still going to be in your life. This doesn't change that. But it did change everything, and we both knew it. It changed the fact that I hadn't been important enough to include in his biggest decision. It changed the fact that somewhere along the way, I had become someone he felt the need to protect Sarah from rather than someone he wanted to share Sarah with. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone for what felt like hours. The silence in my house was deafening, broken only by the humming of the refrigerator and the distant sound of my neighbor's dog barking. The morning sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and I found myself thinking about how different this moment was supposed to be. I had imagined getting a call from Marcus asking for my help planning a proposal. I had imagined being there when he asked Sarah to marry him, maybe even helping him pick out the ring. I had imagined months of wedding planning, of bonding with Sarah over flowers and dresses and seating charts, of finally having the daughter I'd always wanted. Instead, I was sitting alone in my perfect kitchen, surrounded by my perfect things, realizing that somehow, in my quest to create the perfect life for my son, I had made myself someone he didn't want to share his perfect moments with. 27 years ago, I held that boy in my arms in the hospital and promised him I would always be there for him, that I would be the mother he deserved, that I would give him everything I hadn't had growing up in my own chaotic, unpredictable household. My mother had been warm but scattered, loving but unreliable, and I had sworn that my son would have stability, organization, beauty, perfection. And somehow, I had failed so spectacularly that he didn't want me at his wedding. The questions began swirling in my mind like a tornado, each one more painful than the last. What had I done wrong? When had I lost him? How long had he been planning this without telling me? Did Sarah not want me there, or was it his decision? Had they talked about me before deciding to exclude me? What had they said about me in those conversations? Most importantly, how could I fix this before it was too late? I needed answers, and I needed them now. But deep down, beneath the hurt and confusion and desperate need to understand, I was terrified of what I might find when I started digging. I was terrified that the answers might reveal truths about myself that I wasn't ready to face. But I had to know. I had to understand what had gone so wrong between us that my son felt the need to get married in secret, away from the woman who had devoted her entire adult life to loving him. The first thing I did after that devastating phone call was what any modern mother would do. I went straight to social media. My hands were shaking as I typed Marcus Johnson Las Vegas into Facebook's search bar, praying I wouldn't find what I was looking for, hoping that maybe this was all some kind of misunderstanding, some kind of joke that would make sense once I had more information. But there it was, scattered across my computer screen like evidence of a crime I didn't know had been committed against me. Photo after photo of my son's wedding, posted by Sarah's friends, tagged and shared and celebrated by everyone except me. I scrolled through image after image of pure joy, Marcus in a simple black suit that I didn't recognize, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen him in years, Sarah in a flowing white dress that was nothing like the elaborate gown I had imagined helping her choose. There was Marcus spinning Sarah around outside the little white wedding chapel, both of them laughing like teenagers, her dress twirling around them in the desert wind. There was Sarah adjusting his tie while he gazed down at her with such love it made my chest ache with both joy and pain, joy that my son had found someone who looked at him like he hung the moon, pain that I wasn't there to witness this moment of pure happiness. There was the Elvis impersonator in his rhinestone jumpsuit, arms spread wide as he pronounced them husband and wife. There were the random witnesses they'd met at the casino, strangers who had gotten to share in my son's wedding day while his own mother sat at home planning a Thanksgiving dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that everything had already changed. And in every single photo, there was an empty space where I should have been. In every image of celebration and joy and love, there was a missing piece that should have been me, standing beside my son, crying happy tears, welcoming my new daughter into our family. I clicked on Sarah's profile, hungry for more details, more clues about why I had been excluded from this moment. Her relationship status had changed from, in a relationship with Marcus Johnson, to married to Marcus Johnson, and seeing those words made it real in a way that the phone call hadn't. My son was married. My son was married to someone I barely knew, someone who had somehow convinced him that their wedding would be better without his mother there. Her latest post made my blood run cold. Best weekend ever. Sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when you follow your heart instead of other people's expectations. So grateful for a husband who protects our peace and our love. Thanks to everyone who has supported us on this journey. #VegasBaby, #newlywedlife, #no regrets, #follow your heart, #protect your peace. Protects our peace. What did that mean? Was I some kind of threat to their peace? Had I become some kind of obstacle to their happiness that needed to be avoided, managed, worked around? The hashtags felt like tiny daggers. #NoRegrets suggested they were happy about excluding me. #Follow Your Heart implied that including me would have gone against what their hearts wanted. #Protect Your Peace was the worst one, because it meant I was something their peace needed protection from. I kept scrolling, going back weeks, months, looking for any mention of me, any clue about how I had become the villain in my own son's love story. What I found broke my heart even more. Photo after photo of Marcus and Sarah with her family, dinner parties at her parents' house that I wasn't invited to, weekend trips to her sister's cabin that I didn't know about, birthday celebrations and barbecues and casual get-togethers where I was notably, conspicuously absent. But what really got to me were the comments from Sarah's friends and family members. Under a photo of Marcus and Sarah at what looked like a family barbecue, someone had written, "So happy you found someone who puts you first." Another comment read, "Finally, a man who knows what's really important." A third person had written, "Love seeing you so relaxed and happy, Sarah. It's like you can finally be yourself." Finally? What did that mean, finally? Had I been preventing Sarah from being herself? Had my attempts to welcome her into our family somehow made her feel like she couldn't be authentic? I scrolled through more photos, looking for patterns, looking for clues. There were pictures from Marcus's birthday dinner at a restaurant I'd never heard of, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. There were photos from a weekend trip to wine country that he'd never mentioned to me. There were images of Sarah and Marcus at what looked like engagement celebrations with her family, toasting with champagne while her parents beamed in the background. When had my son started living a whole life that didn't include me? When had he stopped calling to tell me about the important things? When had I become someone he needed space from instead of someone he wanted to share his life with? I found myself analyzing every photo for clues about their relationship, trying to understand what I had missed. In picture after picture, they looked genuinely happy, genuinely in love, genuinely at peace. Marcus looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years, his shoulders unclenched, his smile reaching his eyes. Sarah looked comfortable and confident, like she belonged exactly where she was. The painful truth was becoming clear: they weren't just happy despite excluding me from their wedding. They were happy because they had excluded me. I grabbed my phone and called my sister Diane, the one person in my life who would tell me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. She'd always been my sounding board, the voice of reason when my emotions got the better of me, the sister who loved me enough to call me out on my nonsense. "Diane, did you know Marcus was planning to get married? Dorothy, honey, slow down. What's going on? You sound upset. I told her everything, the phone call, the photos, the social media posts that made me feel like I was some kind of villain in my own son's love story. I told her about the comments from Sarah's friends, about the hashtags that felt like accusations, about the empty space in every photo where I should have been standing. When I finished, Diane was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could picture her sitting in her kitchen, choosing her words carefully the way she always did when she had something difficult to say. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading, Dorothy, when was the last time Marcus brought Sarah around for dinner? When was the last time you spent time with them as a couple? I thought about it. Really thought about it, going back through my memories, trying to pinpoint the last time my son and his girlfriend had voluntarily spent time in my presence. It's been months. Maybe since Easter. And how did that go? Easter. Oh God, Easter. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. I had spent weeks planning the perfect Easter brunch. I'd bought new linens for the table, ordered fresh flowers from the expensive florist downtown, planned a menu that would showcase my cooking skills and make Sarah feel welcomed into our family traditions. I'd bought Sarah a beautiful gift, a delicate silver bracelet with a small cross pendant that I thought would be perfect for someone joining our family's Easter celebration. I'd had her favorite flowers, white roses, arranged throughout the house. I'd made her favorite coffee cake, the recipe I'd researched online after casually asking Marcus what Sarah liked for breakfast. Everything had been perfect, from my perspective. The table looked like something out of a magazine. The food was beautifully prepared and elegantly presented. I'd even bought a new dress for the occasion, wanting to look like the kind of mother-in-law that Sarah would be proud to introduce to her own friends. But somehow, throughout the entire meal, I had found myself offering suggestions. When Sarah had started to set the table, I'd gently corrected the placement of the forks. When she tried to help arrange the food on serving platters, I'd shown her a better way to make it look more appealing. When she'd complimented the house, I'd found myself giving her a tour and mentioning small improvements she might consider for her own apartment. I remembered asking her about her career plans, her family background, her thoughts on having children. I thought I was showing interest, building a relationship, getting to know the woman my son loved. But looking back now, with the painful clarity that hindsight provides, I realized that every question had felt like an interview, every suggestion had felt like criticism, every attempt to help had felt like judgment. I remember Sarah getting quieter and quieter as the day went on, her responses becoming shorter, her smile becoming more strained. I remember Marcus getting more and more tense, jumping into redirect conversations, making excuses for why they needed to leave early. Sarah had claimed to have a headache, and I'd immediately offered aspirin, suggested she lie down, asked if she'd been drinking enough water. They had left right after dessert, claiming Sarah needed to rest, and I'd spent the rest of the evening cleaning up my perfect Easter brunch alone, wondering why it had felt like such a failure despite everything going according to plan. Diane, I was just trying to be helpful. I wanted everything to be perfect for them. I wanted Sarah to feel welcomed into our family. Honey, my sister said gently, and I could hear the love and frustration in her voice, maybe your version of perfect wasn't what they needed. Maybe your version of welcoming felt like something else entirely. What do you mean? Dorothy, do you remember when you came to visit me last month? You rearranged my spice cabinet while I was in the bathroom. You reorganized my bookshelf because you thought it would look better by color instead of by author. You suggested 3 different ways I could improve my living room layout before you'd been in my house for an hour. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I was just trying to help. Your spices were all mixed up, and I thought. I know you thought you were helping. That's what makes this so complicated, Dorothy. You genuinely want to make things better for the people you love. But sometimes, when you're constantly suggesting improvements, it feels like you're saying that the way we're doing things isn't good enough. The words hit me like a physical blow. I would never say that. I think you're wonderful just as you are. I know you do. But Dorothy, when someone is constantly pointing out ways to make things better, it's hard not to feel like they think everything you're doing is wrong. After we hung up, I walked through my house looking at it with new eyes. Every room was immaculate, every detail perfectly coordinated, every surface spotless and organized. My living room looked like a magazine spread, with carefully chosen artwork and perfectly arranged furniture. My kitchen was a masterpiece of organization, with every appliance in its designated place and every surface gleaming. But when had it started feeling like a museum instead of a home? When had my need for everything to be perfect become more important than making people feel comfortable? When had my house become a place where people were afraid to touch anything, sit anywhere, or relax completely? I thought about all the times Marcus had called to tell me about his life, his promotion at work, his new apartment, his relationship with Sarah, and how I had responded. Had I listened, or had I immediately started planning and organizing and trying to fix things that didn't need fixing? Had I celebrated his achievements, or had I immediately started thinking about how to make them even better? The worst part was realizing that Sarah's social media post was right. Marcus had protected their peace by not telling me about the wedding. That meant I was the thing their peace needed protection from. I was the source of stress, the complication, the problem that needed to be managed and avoided. I was the mother who loved so hard that it hurt. But understanding the problem was only the first step. Now I had to figure out how to fix it, and I only had 10 days until Thanksgiving to figure out how to salvage my relationship with my son and meet my new daughter-in-law as the mother-in-law I should have been all along. The question was it too late to change? Was it too late to become the mother Marcus needed instead of the mother I thought he should want? And most importantly, was I brave enough to find out? 3 days after that life-changing phone call, I found myself sitting in my car outside Marcus's apartment building at 2:30 in the afternoon, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white. I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, working up the courage to go inside and have the conversation I knew we needed to have. I had called him that morning, my voice shaking as I asked if we could talk face to face. The hesitation in his voice before he agreed told me everything I needed to know about how unwelcome this visit really was, but I had to try. I had to understand what had gone so wrong between us, and more importantly, I had to find a way to make it right before our relationship was damaged beyond repair. The apartment building was one of those modern complexes with clean lines and lots of glass, the kind of place young professionals lived when they wanted to feel sophisticated and independent. Marcus had moved here 2 years ago, and I'd helped him pick it out, or rather, I'd driven him around to 17 different apartments and made pro and con lists for each one until he'd finally chosen this one, partly because it had the kitchen layout I thought was most practical. Looking back now, I wondered if he'd chosen it because he genuinely loved it, or because it was easier to agree with my recommendation than to argue with my reasoning. I walked through the lobby, past the modern furniture and abstract artwork that I'd never really liked but had told Marcus was very contemporary, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. My heart was pounding as I walked down the hallway, past doors that all looked identical, carrying a small gift bag containing a crystal vase I'd picked up that morning because I couldn't show up empty-handed to my son's home, especially not when I was meeting his wife for the first time as his wife. Marcus opened the door wearing an expression I'd never seen before, guarded, almost wary, like he was bracing himself for impact. He was dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, and I noticed that he looked tired, like the past few days had been as emotionally exhausting for him as they had been for me. Behind him stood Sarah, and I could see her physically tense up the moment she saw me. She was wearing a simple sundress and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in any of the wedding photos. Her smile was polite but strained, the kind of smile you give to someone you're not sure you can trust. "Hi Mom," Marcus said, stepping back to let me in. "Sarah, you remember my mother, Dorothy." "Of course," Sarah said, extending her hand for a handshake rather than going in for a hug. "It's nice to see you again, Mrs. Johnson." The formality of it broke my heart. Here was my son's wife, the woman he'd chosen to spend his life with, and she was treating me like a stranger, like someone she needed to be polite to but didn't particularly want to know. "Congratulations on the marriage," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and warm. "I brought you both a little something." I handed them the gift bag, watching as Sarah opened it carefully, thanking me graciously for the beautiful crystal vase. But I could see Marcus and her exchange a look, a quick, wordless communication between married couples that spoke volumes. Later, I would realize that look was them silently discussing where they could possibly put another decorative item I had chosen for them, another beautiful thing that didn't match their style or fit their space but that they would feel obligated to display because it came from Marcus's mother. We sat in their living room, which I noticed was decorated in a style completely different from what I would have chosen, warm and eclectic rather than coordinated and formal, with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together and artwork that was colorful and personal rather than neutral and safe. It was a space that looked lived in rather than designed, comfortable rather than impressive. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could hear the traffic outside, the hum of their air conditioner, the ticking of a clock somewhere in the apartment. Sarah sat close to Marcus on their couch, not quite touching but clearly united, while I sat across from them in an armchair, feeling like I was on trial. Finally, I took a deep breath and asked the question I'd been rehearsing for days. Marcus, I need to understand. Why didn't you want me at your wedding? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when he was little and had to confess to breaking something or getting in trouble at school. Mom, it wasn't about not wanting you there. It was about needing something that was just ours. But I'm your mother. I raised you by myself after your father died when you were 5 years old. I sacrificed everything to give you the best life I could. Don't I deserve to be part of the most important moments of your life? The words came out more accusatory than I'd intended, and I watched Marcus flinch slightly. Sarah reached for his hand, and I saw him squeeze it like she was anchoring him, giving him strength for a conversation he'd probably been dreading for days. Then Sarah spoke, and her voice was gentle but firm, careful but direct. Mrs. Johnson, with respect, this wasn't about what anyone deserved. This was about what we needed for our relationship. I don't understand what that means. What could you possibly need protection from? I've only ever wanted what's best for Marcus. I've only ever tried to support and help and make things better. Marcus looked at Sarah, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to continue. The fact that he needed her permission to be honest with his own mother was another small dagger to my heart. Mom, do you remember my college graduation? Of course I remembered. It was one of the proudest days of my life. My baby boy, the first person in our family to graduate from college, walking across that stage in his cap and gown while I cried happy tears in the audience. I'd planned a beautiful celebration dinner afterward, invited all the family, made sure everything was perfect to honor his achievement. You spent the entire party correcting the restaurant staff about how the table should be set and complaining that they got your seating chart wrong, Marcus continued, his voice gentle but steady. You sent the appetizers back because they weren't arranged the way you'd requested. You asked to speak to the manager because the flowers weren't the right shade of blue. You barely spoke to me the entire evening because you were so focused on managing everyone else's experience. My mouth fell open. I was making sure everything was special for you. It was your graduation dinner. I wanted it to be perfect. But Mom, I just wanted to celebrate with the people I loved. Instead, I spent the whole night watching you stress about details that didn't matter to anyone but you. I spent my graduation dinner feeling embarrassed and wishing we'd just gone for pizza. Sarah spoke up again, her voice still gentle but more direct than before. Mrs. Johnson, every time we've spent time together, I've felt like I was being evaluated instead of welcomed. Like I was a project you needed to improve instead of a person you wanted to know. The words hit me like physical blows. That's not. I never meant. I know you didn't mean it, Marcus said, leaning forward, his eyes filled with a pain I'd never seen before. That's what makes this so hard, Mom. I know you love me. But sometimes your love feels like it comes with so many conditions and expectations that I can't breathe. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. All I've ever wanted was to be a good mother to you. To give you the perfect childhood, the perfect celebrations, the perfect family. After your father died, I promised myself that you would never want for anything, never feel like anything in your life was lacking. But Mom, Marcus said softly, I never needed perfect. I just needed you to love me as I was, not as the version of me you thought I should be. The conversation continued for another hour, and with each revelation, I felt my carefully constructed understanding of our relationship crumble piece by piece. Marcus told me about times he'd wanted to share something with me but didn't, knowing I would try to fix it instead of just listening. He told me about achievements he'd minimized because he didn't want to deal with my elaborate celebration plans. He told me about problems he'd worked through alone because he was tired of my advice coming with reorganization projects and improvement suggestions. Sarah shared how she'd tried so hard to earn my approval during those first few months of dating Marcus that she'd started to lose herself in the process. She told me about lying awake at night after spending time with me, analyzing everything she'd said and done, wondering what she'd gotten wrong, what she needed to improve to be good enough for Marcus's mother. The Vegas wedding, Sarah explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, was the first time I felt like I could just be myself, just be happy, without worrying about meeting someone else's expectations of what our love story should look like. It was the first time our relationship felt completely ours. But I wanted to be part of your love story, I said, my voice breaking. I wanted to welcome you into our family. I wanted to celebrate your love. Mrs. Johnson, Sarah said gently, I think you wanted to direct our love story. And we needed to write it ourselves. When I finally left their apartment that evening, walking through the lobby and out into the cool November air, I felt like I was carrying the weight of 27 years of good intentions that had somehow gone terribly wrong. I had loved my son so much that I had smothered him. I had wanted his life to be so perfect that I had made it impossible for him to share his imperfect, beautiful, real moments with me. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine, staring up at the windows of their apartment, wondering if they were talking about me, wondering if they were relieved that the difficult conversation was over, wondering if there was any hope of salvaging the relationship I had worked so hard to perfect that I had broken it entirely. But as painful as this conversation had been, it had also given me something I desperately needed, the truth. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I had a clear picture of how my love had been received, how my care had been experienced, how my good intentions had been translated into pressure and criticism and impossible standards. I finally understood what Sarah had meant in her Facebook post about protecting their peace. Their peace needed protection from my anxiety, my need to control, my inability to let things be imperfect and still beautiful. And for the first time since that devastating phone call 3 days ago, I began to see a path forward. It was a terrifying path that would require me to examine everything I thought I knew about love and motherhood and care. It would require me to change in ways I wasn't sure I was capable of changing. But if there was any chance of salvaging my relationship with my son, if there was any possibility of becoming the mother-in-law Sarah deserved and the mother Marcus needed, I had to try. I just hoped it wasn't too late. The days following that confrontational conversation felt like I was living in someone else's life, walking through rooms that looked familiar but felt completely foreign. I kept replaying Marcus and Sarah's words, examining every memory through this new, uncomfortable lens they had given me, and with each examination, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place with painful clarity. I thought about Marcus's high school graduation, when I'd insisted on redoing his cap decoration because the one he'd made looked too casual for such an important milestone. I'd spent 2 hours the night before his ceremony carefully removing his decorations and replacing them with a more sophisticated design that I thought better reflected the significance of the occasion. He'd thanked me politely, but now I remembered the look in his eyes, not gratitude, but resignation. I remembered his first serious girlfriend in college, Rebecca, who had seemed so sweet and eager to please when Marcus first brought her home. I'd peppered her with questions about her major, her family background, her career plans, thinking I was showing interest and building a relationship. But as the semester went on, she'd started declining invitations to family dinners, stopped coming home with Marcus for breaks, gradually disappeared from his life entirely. At the time, I'd assumed they'd simply grown apart, the way college relationships often do. Now I wondered if she'd felt the same evaluation pressure that Sarah had described, if she'd decided that being with Marcus wasn't worth the stress of trying to meet his mother's impossible standards. I recalled the housewarming party I'd thrown for Marcus's new apartment 2 years ago, the one where I'd arrived 3 hours early to help set up and had ended up rearranging his furniture while he was out getting ice. I'd been so proud of how much better the space looked with my adjustments, how much more mature and sophisticated it seemed with the furniture properly positioned and the decorative elements correctly arranged. But Marcus had come home to find his comfortable, lived-in space transformed into something that looked more like a showroom than a home. I'd been expecting gratitude, but instead I'd gotten that same resigned politeness, that careful, "Thanks, Mom, it looks great," that I was beginning to recognize as his way of avoiding conflict rather than expressing genuine appreciation. Every memory now came with a new understanding. I hadn't been helping. I had been controlling. I hadn't been supportive. I had been suffocating. The realization sent me into a spiral of grief that I wasn't prepared for. I grieved for the mother I thought I had been, loving, supportive, generous with my time and energy and resources. I grieved for the relationship I thought Marcus and I had, close, communicative, built on mutual respect and affection. Most of all, I grieved for all the genuine moments of connection I had missed because I was too busy orchestrating the perfect experience to notice what was actually happening in front of me. I called in sick to work for 3 days, something I hadn't done in over 5 years. I barely left my house, surviving on coffee and the occasional piece of toast, unable to summon the energy to prepare the elaborate meals I usually took such pride in. My perfectly organized, immaculately decorated home felt like a monument to everything that was wrong with me. Every carefully placed object, every coordinated color scheme, every spotless surface seemed to mock me with its cold perfection. I wandered through my house like a ghost, seeing it for what it really was for the first time. The living room where no one ever felt comfortable sitting on the pristine white sofa. The dining room that was so formal that Marcus and his friends had always gravitated toward eating in the kitchen instead. The guest bedroom that was so perfectly appointed that visitors felt guilty about disturbing anything, preferring to stay in hotels rather than mess up my beautiful space. When had I stopped creating a home and started curating a museum? When had my need for visual perfection become more important than emotional comfort? When had I become someone who cared more about how things looked than how they felt? On the 4th day, Diane showed up at my door with coffee and the kind of no-nonsense expression that meant she wasn't leaving until we talked. She took one look at me, still in my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon, my hair unwashed, my usually immaculate appearance completely disheveled, and pushed past me into my living room. "You look terrible," she said, setting the coffee on my pristine glass coffee table without using a coaster, something that would have made me cringe a week ago but now seemed beautifully rebellious. "Thank you for the pep talk," I muttered, but I was grateful for her presence, grateful for someone who would tell me the truth even when it hurt. "Dorothy, you can't punish yourself forever for being human. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I slumped into my perfect armchair, the one that looked beautiful but had never been particularly comfortable. "I don't know how to be different, Diane. This is who I am. I organize things. I make them beautiful. I try to help. I try to make everything perfect for the people I love." "No, honey." Diane sat across from me, her expression gentle but direct. "You control things because you're terrified of chaos. You make them perfect because you're afraid of criticism. And you try to help because you can't stand feeling powerless." Her words stung because they were true, truer than I wanted to admit. After Marcus's father died when Marcus was only 5, after I'd gotten the phone call that shattered my world and left me alone to raise a child while drowning in grief, I had grabbed control of everything I could because so much had been taken out of my hands. I had organized and planned and perfected our lives because I couldn't bear the thought of any more unexpected devastation. If everything was controlled, if every detail was managed, if every possibility was planned for, then nothing bad could happen. Nothing could catch us off guard. Nothing could hurt us the way David's sudden heart attack had hurt us. But somewhere along the way, Diane continued, you forgot that love isn't about creating the perfect environment. It's about showing up authentically for the people you care about, mess and all. What if he doesn't forgive me? What if I've damaged our relationship beyond repair? What if Sarah decides I'm too much work and convinces him to cut me out of their lives entirely? Then you'll deal with that too. But Dorothy, you raised a good man. He married a woman who seems to truly love him and want the best for him. Maybe trust that the foundation you gave him, not the perfect surface stuff, but the real foundation of love and values and strength, maybe trust that it was strong enough to build something new on. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down with no agenda, no plan, no goal except to really think about who I wanted to be moving forward. Not who I thought I should be, not who would look best to the outside world, but who I actually wanted to be in my heart. I thought about the mother Marcus needed now, not the controlling perfectionist who had raised him, but a woman who could celebrate his choices even when they weren't what she would have chosen. Someone who could support his dreams even when she didn't understand them. Someone who could love his wife not as an extension of him, but as her own person deserving of respect and acceptance. I thought about the mother-in-law Sarah deserved, not someone who evaluated and corrected her, but someone who welcomed her with genuine warmth. Someone who asked about her life because she was genuinely interested, not because she was gathering information to make improvements. Someone who made her feel like she belonged rather than like she was auditioning for belonging. Most importantly, I thought about the woman I wanted to be for myself, not someone whose worth was measured by how perfectly she could orchestrate other people's lives, but someone who could find peace in authentic connection, even when it was messy and unpredictable and imperfect. I thought about my own mother, who had died 5 years earlier but whose memory I still carried with complicated feelings. She had been warm but scattered, loving but unreliable, the kind of woman who would forget to buy groceries but remember to sing lullabies, who would let the dishes pile up in the sink but never miss a chance to dance with her children in the living room. I had spent my entire adult life trying to be everything she wasn't, organized where she was chaotic, reliable where she was spontaneous, perfect where she was beautifully, messily human. But maybe, in my quest to avoid her mistakes, I had made different but equally damaging ones. Maybe what Marcus had needed wasn't a perfect mother, but a real one. The week before Thanksgiving, I made a decision that terrified me more than anything I'd done since David's funeral. I called Marcus and asked if I could take Sarah out for coffee, just the two of us. I needed to start building a real relationship with my daughter-in-law, and I needed to do it without the safety net of my son's presence, without the familiar dynamics that allowed me to fall back into old patterns. "Are you sure, Mom?" Marcus asked, and I could hear both hope and worry in his voice. Hope that maybe we could find a way forward, worry that I might make things worse. "I'm sure," I said, though I wasn't sure of anything except that I had to try. "I want to get to know Sarah as Sarah, not as your girlfriend or your wife or the woman I think you should have chosen. I want to know her as herself." Sarah agreed to meet me, though I could tell she was as nervous as I was. We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place I would normally dismiss as too casual, too unpredictable, too likely to have imperfect service or uncomfortable seating. But that day, I was grateful for its imperfection, grateful for a space that didn't carry the weight of my expectations. I arrived early, as was my habit, and chose a table near the window where the late afternoon light streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the scratches on the worn wooden table. The cafe was busy with the usual mix of college students and remote workers, conversations flowing around me in a comfortable hum of human connection. When Sarah walked in, looking as nervous as I felt, I stood up and waved her over. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in our previous interactions. We ordered our drinks. She got a fancy latte with some kind of flavored syrup, I got plain black coffee, and sat across from each other, two women trying to figure out how to love the same man without competing for his attention. "Sarah," I began, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be, "I owe you an apology. I made you feel unwelcome in what should have been your second family, and that was wrong." She looked surprised, like she had been prepared for a different kind of conversation, maybe another attempt at managing or improving or correcting. "I also want you to know," I continued, "that I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I need to earn your trust. But I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to try." For the first time since I'd met her, Sarah's smile reached her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, I'd like that very much." "Call me Dorothy," I said. "And tell me about yourself. Not the version you think I want to hear, but the real you. I want to know who my son fell in love with." And so she did. We talked for 3 hours, our coffee growing cold as we discovered each other beyond the roles of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. I learned that Sarah was a pediatric nurse who had chosen her profession because she believed children deserved to have advocates in their most vulnerable moments. She told me about growing up as the youngest of 4 children in a chaotic but loving household where dinner was never served at the same time twice but everyone always felt heard and valued. She told me about her terrible reality TV addiction, her secret talent for karaoke, her complete inability to keep houseplants alive despite repeated attempts. She shared her fears about being a good wife, her excitement about building a life with Marcus, her dreams of maybe having children someday, but her uncertainty about whether she'd be a good mother. "I worry I'll mess them up," she admitted, stirring the foam in her long cold latte. "I worry I'll love them wrong somehow." "There's no perfect way to love someone," I said, the words surprising me as they came out. I spent 27 years trying to love Marcus perfectly, and all I did was make him feel like he had to be perfect to deserve that love. Most importantly, she told me about how much she loved my son, not for who she thought he could become, but for exactly who he was in that moment. She told me about his terrible jokes that made her laugh anyway, about his obsession with obscure documentaries, about the way he sang off-key in the shower every morning and how it was one of her favorite sounds in the world. "He talks about you all the time," she said, and I felt my heart skip. "He tells stories about his childhood, about how hard you worked to give him everything he needed after his dad died. He's so proud of the woman you are, Dorothy. He just needed space to become the man he wanted to be." By the time we parted ways, I felt like I had glimpsed the daughter I never knew I wanted. Sarah was nothing like the polished, accomplished woman I had imagined Marcus ending up with. She was better. She was real, authentic, genuinely caring, and absolutely perfect for my son, not because she met some checklist of qualifications, but because she loved him completely and he loved her the same way. And for the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful about Thanksgiving, hopeful about our future as a family, hopeful that maybe it wasn't too late to learn how to love without conditions, support without controlling, and welcome without requiring perfection. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and drizzly, which felt appropriate for the emotional weather I'd been experiencing for the past 3 weeks. But as I stood in my kitchen looking around at the chaos I had deliberately created, ingredients scattered across counters, recipe cards mixed up with coffee stains, my usually pristine space looking lived in for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about the imperfect. I had made a decision that would have horrified the old Dorothy. Instead of planning every detail of this dinner down to the napkin placement, I had asked Marcus and Sarah what they wanted to contribute. Not what I thought would complement my menu, not what would look best on my table, but what would make them feel like true participants in our family celebration rather than guests at my performance. Marcus was bringing his famous mac and cheese, the one with the crispy breadcrumb topping and 3 different kinds of cheese that I had always quietly considered too casual for our Thanksgiving table. I had suggested more sophisticated side dishes in the past, offering to make something that would elevate the meal, but this year I had simply said, "That sounds perfect. I can't wait to taste it." Sarah was making her grandmother's cornbread stuffing, the recipe she had mentioned wanting to share for the past 2 years but that I had politely declined in favor of my own sage stuffing that looked more elegant and photographed better. This year, when she offered, I had immediately said yes, asking if she needed any special ingredients or equipment, genuinely excited to taste something that connected her to her family history. I was making the turkey, of course, and my green bean casserole that Marcus had loved since childhood, and my famous pumpkin pie that had been a tradition since his father was alive. But everything else was a collaboration, a potluck approach that would have made me nervous before but now filled me with anticipation. When they arrived at noon, I watched Marcus take in the scene, the slightly chaotic kitchen, the mismatched serving dishes I'd pulled out instead of my formal china, the handwritten place cards that were crooked and imperfect because I'd let my emotions guide my penmanship instead of my need for precision. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" he asked, concerned, and I realized how strange this must seem to him after a lifetime of military precision holiday preparation. "I'm feeling different," I admitted, wiping my hands on my apron. "Good different, I think." Sarah handed me a bottle of wine and kissed my cheek, a gesture that felt both natural and precious. "Is there anything we can help with?" The old me would have said no, would have insisted everything was under control, would have directed them to the living room to wait while I put the finishing touches on my perfectly orchestrated meal. Instead, I handed her the can opener and pointed to the cranberry sauce sitting on the counter. "Would you mind?" I never could get those things to open properly without making a mess. It was a lie. I had been opening cans with surgical precision for decades, but it was also a truth. I had never allowed myself to make messes, never given myself permission to struggle with simple tasks, never admitted that sometimes the small imperfections were what made moments memorable. As we worked together in the kitchen, something magical began to happen. Instead of the tense, orchestrated performance of previous years, we fell into an easy rhythm that felt more like a dance than a production. Marcus told us stories about his coworkers that had us laughing until our sides hurt, including an elaborate tale about someone microwaving fish in the office kitchen that had led to a company-wide email about appropriate lunch choices. Sarah shared embarrassing childhood Thanksgiving disasters that made my own imperfections seem endearing rather than shameful, like the year her family's dog ate half the turkey while they were saying grace, or the time her aunt accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the sweet potatoes and no one had the heart to tell her. "We all ate them anyway," Sarah laughed, carefully spooning cranberry sauce into a serving bowl. Everyone kept saying how unique they were and asking for the recipe. When Marcus accidentally dropped the salt shaker while reaching for the pepper, and it shattered across my pristine kitchen floor in an explosion of ceramic pieces and white crystals, I waited for my old instincts to kick in, the immediate need to clean it up, to restore order, to make sure nothing disrupted the perfect day I had planned. Instead, I found myself laughing, actually laughing at the mess. "Well, that's 7 years of good luck, right? Mom, I'm so sorry, let me clean it up right now." "Marcus, honey, it's just a salt shaker. We'll clean it up in a minute. The floor isn't going anywhere." The look of shock on his face made me realize how rigid I must have been all these years, how every small accident had been treated like a crisis that threatened the perfection of our time together. How many moments of genuine connection had I missed because I was too focused on maintaining the illusion that everything was under control? We swept up the salt and ceramic pieces together, all three of us crouched on the kitchen floor, and somehow that became one of the sweetest moments of the entire day. Sarah found a piece of ceramic shaped like a heart, and we all agreed it was a good omen for the holiday. During dinner, served on my everyday dishes because they were more comfortable and less intimidating than the formal china, I made another decision that surprised even me. Instead of steering the conversation toward topics I deemed appropriate for a family holiday, I asked them about their Vegas wedding. Really asked, not with judgment or hurt feelings, but with genuine curiosity about their experience. "Tell me about the Elvis impersonator," I said, refilling Sarah's wine glass and settling back in my chair like I had all the time in the world to hear their story. Sarah lit up in a way I'd never seen before, her face glowing with joy and mischief. "Oh my God, Dorothy, he was incredible. He had these rhinestone jumpsuits that must have weighed 50 pounds, and he kept calling Marcus son, and me little darlin', in this deep southern drawl that was nothing like Elvis but somehow perfect anyway." Marcus was grinning as he picked up the story. "And then he insisted on singing Can't Help Falling in Love while we had our first dance, right there in the chapel with the neon lights and plastic flowers and a disco ball that looked like it was left over from 1975. He also offered to throw rice for an extra $20, Sarah added, but when we said no, he threw glitter instead. We were finding sparkles in our hair for days afterward." "It sounds absolutely perfect," I said, and I meant it with my whole heart. "Not the perfect I would have planned, but perfect for you too." "It really was, Mom. It was exactly what we wanted. It was us." After dinner, as we sat in my living room with coffee and pie, the dishes still sitting on the table because we were too comfortable and content to worry about them, Sarah asked me about Marcus's childhood. Instead of sharing my carefully curated stories about his achievements and milestones, I found myself telling her about the real moments, the ones I'd always considered too messy or embarrassing or imperfect to share. I told her about how he used to make elaborate blanket forts in the living room and insist we eat dinner inside them, complete with flashlights and whispered conversations about adventures we might have. I told her about his phase of trying to give every stray cat in the neighborhood a home in our garage, and how I'd find him out there every morning at 6, sharing his cereal with a rotating cast of feline visitors. I told her about the time he cried for an hour when he accidentally stepped on a bug and wanted to have a proper funeral for it, complete with a shoebox casket and a eulogy about how the aunt had probably been a good provider for its family. "He sounds exactly like the man I married," Sarah said, reaching for Marcus's hand. "Someone who builds homes wherever he goes and makes everyone feel cared for." Looking at my son through his wife's eyes, I saw him not as the perfect child I had tried to create, but as the wonderful, imperfect, beautifully human man he had become despite my attempts to control his development. I saw his kindness, his empathy, his ability to find joy in simple moments, qualities that had nothing to do with my careful planning and everything to do with who he naturally was. As they were getting ready to leave that evening, Marcus pulled me aside in the kitchen while Sarah was getting her coat. "Mom, this was the best Thanksgiving we've ever had." "Really?" "But everything was so messy. Unplanned. Nothing went according to schedule." "That's exactly why it was perfect. For the first time, it felt like we were just family spending time together, not performing some idea of what family should look like." He hugged me then, a real hug that lasted longer than our usual polite embraces, and I felt him relax against me in a way he hadn't since he was small. "I love you, Mom. Thank you for letting us be part of this instead of just guests at it." After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by dirty dishes and crumpled napkins and the beautiful chaos of a meal that had been about connection rather than perfection. I thought about the woman I had been just 3 weeks ago, so devastated by being excluded from my son's wedding that I couldn't see past my own hurt to understand why it had happened. That woman had been so focused on orchestrating love that she had forgotten how to simply offer it. This new version of me, the one who could laugh at broken salt shakers and ask about Elvis impersonators and admit when she didn't know how to use a can opener, felt lighter somehow, like I had been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. I picked up my phone and started typing a text to Marcus. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be the mother you needed instead of the one I thought you should want." His response came quickly. "Thank you for becoming her, Mom. Sarah and I are so grateful to have you in our lives. We love you." As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I realized that this Thanksgiving had given me exactly what the holiday was meant to celebrate: genuine gratitude. Not for the perfect family dinner I had always tried to create, but for the beautifully imperfect family I had somehow been blessed with all along. I was grateful for a son brave enough to protect his happiness, even from his own mother's good intentions. I was grateful for a daughter-in-law generous enough to give me a second chance to know her. And most of all, I was grateful for the devastating phone call that had shattered my carefully constructed world and forced me to build something better from the pieces. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with the words you never wanted to hear. Sometimes the greatest gift is having your heart broken open wide enough to let real love in. And sometimes, the most perfect family moments happen when you finally stop trying to make them perfect and start letting them be real. The next morning, I woke up in my slightly messy house, surrounded by evidence of a holiday that had been celebrated rather than performed, and I smiled. For the first time in years, I was excited about what came next instead of worried about how to control it. If you've ever felt like you've loved someone so hard that it hurt them, if you've ever realized that your good intentions were creating bad outcomes, if you've ever had to learn how to love differently, share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful transformations happen when we're brave enough to admit we were wrong and willing enough to change. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way back to love when you thought it was too late.